All right, cloud security fans, get ready because we're going deep on those fundamental cloud building blocks,
Yeah, those essential pieces that make the cloud, well, work.
especially for anyone out there gearing up for that CCSP exam.
Absolutely. We're talking about more than just definitions here. We're going to look at why these pieces are so important for, well, solid cloud security.
Especially when you're thinking about the CCSP exam. Right.
Exactly. Think of it kind of like constructing a building. You
Sure.
got to
Yeah.
get how strong each brick is and how they all fit together to make a secure structure. And it's the same idea with the cloud.
I love that. The cloud as a building. So let's break down that first building block, compute. For someone who's coming from, a traditional IT world, how is compute in the cloud, I don't know, different?
It's a whole different ball game. Before you'd buy a whole server, even if you only needed a tiny bit of its power.
Right.
But in the cloud, with those virtual servers, you only pay for what you actually use. And you can scale up or down whenever you need to.
So you've got flexibility, agility, but that also means there's new security things to worry about. What are some of the big security challenges with cloud compute, especially the ones that might pop up on the CCSP exam?
Shared responsibility is a big one. You're in charge of securing your apps and your data.
Right.
But the cloud provider, they're responsible for the underlying infrastructure.
Yeah.
Understanding where that line is, that's crucial for acing the CCSP.
So knowing what you need to handle versus what the cloud provider takes care of. What about things like securing those virtual machine images and managing access control?
Absolutely. You got to be sure those virtual machine images, they're clean, no vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And that only the right people can get to your virtual servers. Think strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, and least privilege, only giving access when absolutely necessary.
So securing cloud compute is all about layers of protection. Would you say that's accurate?
You got it. And this is where understanding stuff like security groups comes in. They act like virtual firewalls for your servers. The CCSP exam, they love to test you on these practical security controls.
Okay, so compute, we got that covered. Now let's move on to storage. I feel like every day there's a new kind of cloud storage being announced. What are the core things someone studying for the CCSP needs to really grasp when it comes to storage?
The CCSP is going to zero in on the big two: block storage and object storage.
Yeah.
Block storage, think of it like having your own hard drives in the cloud, perfect for applications that need speed, like databases.
Got it.
And object storage, that's like a giant pool of data, good for storing things like, I don't know, backups and media files.
So choosing the right type of storage, it really depends on what your application needs and the type of data you're dealing with. What about security? What are some of the things to watch out for with cloud storage that might show up on that CCSP exam?
Yeah. Data encryption, that's a huge one. They're going to want to know you get how to encrypt data at rest. That means when it's just sitting there and in transit, like when it's moving around the network.
Right, because even if it's in a super secure data center, it still needs protection from prying eyes. What about data loss prevention and getting your data back if something goes wrong? Are those things the CCSP folks care about?
Definitely. You need to know how to set up those data loss prevention policies so sensitive data doesn't just walk out of your cloud environment.
Yeah.
And you need a solid plan for disaster recovery with backups and redundancy just in case.
So it's not just about picking the right storage type. It's about keeping the data in that storage safe and sound. Anything else our listeners should keep in mind, especially those focused on the CCSP when we're talking about cloud storage?
Yeah, data sovereignty, that's a good one.
Okay.
Where your data actually lives physically and what that means legally. The CCSP exam might ask about that. Think GDPR and all those data privacy rules.
That's a really important point. Data location and compliance, those can definitely trip you up. Okay, we've tackled compute, we've done storage, now let's get to the next one. Networking, I'll admit. Networking can be a bit of a head scratcher sometimes.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a maze.
Exactly. So what are the big networking ideas that are absolutely essential for that CCSP exam?
Think of cloud networking as the nervous system of your cloud setup. It connects everything and lets those resources talk to each other.
Okay.
One key concept is the virtual private cloud, VPC for short. It's your own little network within the cloud provider's world, keeping your stuff separate from other users' stuff.
So it's like having your own little walled garden in that vast cloud landscape. How do we keep that garden secure, keep the bad guys out?
Security groups, those are your best friend here. They're like virtual guards at the gate of your servers and databases.
Okay.
You set the rules, who can come in, who can't, based on where they're coming from, what they're trying to do.
So you can get really specific, like only allowing traffic from your web servers to talk to your database servers. But what about letting customers browse our website? How does that work?
That's where internet gateways come in. They're like controlled entry points to the public internet.
Got it.
We can also use load balancers, so if a ton of people try to visit your site at once, it doesn't crash.
Right. So our cloud network, it's like a bouncer and a traffic cop, all rolled into one, keeping things flowing smoothly and securely. But let's zoom in on those databases for a second. How do we even pick the right kind of database for, say, an online store? And what are the security things we got to think about?
Well, first, you got to figure out what kind of data you're working with. If it's structured data like customer info and order details, a relational database, something like MySQL or PostgreSQL would be a good fit.
So our relational database is like the inventory room, keeping track of all the products and customer info in neat little rows and columns. How do we lock down that inventory room, make sure nobody's sneaking in?
Access control is key. We got to be sure only the right apps and users can get in there. We can use things like usernames and passwords, and that least privilege thing again, only giving people access to what they absolutely need.
Right. It's like giving each employee a key card that only unlocks certain doors. But what about protecting the data itself, even if someone gets past those locks?
Encryption, that's our heavy hitter here. We can encrypt the data while it's just hanging out on the disk and when it's moving around. So even if someone swipes the whole database server, the data's useless without the right key.
So where do we keep those keys safe? We're not just writing them down on a sticky note, are we?
Definitely not. We've got key management services for that, or we can use those fancy hardware security modules for extra protection.
So it's serious business. We've got compute, storage, networking, databases. It feels like every part of this cloud setup has its own security challenges.
You're catching on. It's like a big puzzle, and each piece needs to fit just right securely.
Exactly. And speaking of fitting pieces together, let's talk about that last building block for today. Cloud orchestration. I got to be honest, it still sounds a bit like magic to me.
It's kind of like having a conductor for your cloud orchestra. It makes sure all those different instruments, your cloud components, they're playing together nicely.
Okay, I'm starting to see the picture. But how does this conductor help with security? And what do people studying for the CCSP need to know about it?
Well, one of the biggest risks with this conductor is that it can get things wrong if you're not careful. You could accidentally expose data or create weak spots in your cloud.
So it's like giving someone the keys to the kingdom. You got to be sure they know what they're doing.
You got it. That's why we need strong access control, authentication, the whole 9 yards. We got to limit who can even touch those orchestration tools.
Right, because if the wrong person gets their hands on those tools, it could be a disaster.
Absolutely. And we also got to think about secure coding, scanning for vulnerabilities, and keeping secrets like API keys and passwords locked down tight.
So we're treating our orchestration code like the crown jewels, with the utmost care and attention.
That's the idea. Security every step of the way.
We've covered a lot today: compute, storage, networking, databases, and orchestration. And we've talked about how to secure each of them, especially for those folks getting ready for that CCSP exam. But I feel like we're just getting started. There's so much more to learn.
Oh, yeah, we've just laid the groundwork here.
Well, on that note, let's take a quick breather and let all this sink in. When we come back, we'll dig into some real-world examples and see how all these building blocks work together in practice. Welcome back, everyone. Ready to put those building blocks to work? Let's see how this all plays out in the real world.
Let's do it. How about we take what we've learned and apply it to, say, securing a web application in the cloud, something a lot of our listeners might be dealing with.
Okay, I'm imagining like a typical e-commerce site, people browsing products, adding stuff to their carts, the usual.
Exactly. So what would we need in the cloud to make that happen securely?
Yeah, what are the pieces?
Well, first off, we need some serious compute power to run the whole thing. That's where our virtual servers come in.
Right, they're doing the heavy lifting, handling all those user requests, making sure transactions go through smoothly.
Exactly. Keeping the site up and running.
Okay, so we've got the shop floor, but what about storing all the stuff, the product images, the customer data, all that?
We're going to need a mix of storage for that, for those product images, and other content that doesn't change much. Object storage is perfect.
Okay.
It's cost effective and it can handle a ton of data, no problem.
So that's like our giant warehouse
Yeah.
holding all the visuals. But what about the sensitive stuff, like customer info and order details?
That's where we want the security and speed of block storage. Think of it like dedicated hard drives hooked up to our database servers.
Got it. Fast access
Mm.
and strong protection for the important data. So
Mhm.
we've got our compute, we've got our storage figured out. Now how do we connect it all together? And make sure our e-commerce site is open for business, but also safe from those bad actors.
That's where our cloud networking skills come in, specifically the VPC, remember? Our own private network within the cloud provider's world.
Right, our own little walled garden, keeping our resources separate and controlled.
Exactly. And security groups, those are our gatekeepers.
Right, like virtual bouncers, deciding who gets in and who stays out.
We can get super specific with the rules, like only allowing traffic from our web servers to talk to our database servers, that kind of thing.
Okay, so we're controlling the flow within our little walled garden. But how do we let the customers in, the people browsing the site?
For that, we've got internet gateways, providing a controlled path to the public internet. And load balancers, they help distribute traffic across multiple servers, so if there's a sudden rush of customers, the site doesn't crash.
Okay, so our network is doing a lot. It's protecting us, it's directing traffic, it's keeping things running smoothly.
Uh-huh.
But let's go back to those databases for a minute. How do we even choose the right kind of database for an e-commerce site? And what about security? Any tips there?
Well, it all comes down to what kind of data you're dealing with. For structured data like customer profiles and order details, a relational database is usually a good fit.
Right, like MySQL or PostgreSQL, something like that?
Exactly. Think of it like the inventory system for your online store, everything organized nice and neat.
Okay, so how do we make sure that inventory system is locked down tight?
Access control is huge here. We only want authorized apps and users getting in there. We can use those usernames and passwords. And the principle of least privilege comes in again, only giving access to what's absolutely necessary.
It's like giving each employee a key card that only unlocks certain doors. But what about protecting the data itself, even if someone gets past those initial defenses?
Encryption, that's our secret weapon.
Right, we talked about that before.
We encrypt the data while it's stored and while it's moving around, so even if someone manages to steal the whole database server, the data is scrambled without the encryption key.
So those keys, they're pretty important. Where do we keep them safe? We're not just tucking them away in a drawer somewhere, right?
Definitely not. We use dedicated key management services, or we can use hardware security modules for even stronger protection.
So it's serious business, keeping those keys safe. We've talked about compute, storage, networking, databases, each one with its own security challenges.
It's all connected. Every piece of the puzzle has to be secure.
And speaking of connecting pieces, let's bring back cloud orchestration. How can we use that to manage our e-commerce site and keep it secure at the same time?
Think of orchestration like having a blueprint for your whole setup. We can use tools like Terraform or AWS CloudFormation to define everything as code. The servers, the storage, the databases, the network, all of it.
So we're writing code that sets everything up automatically instead of doing it all manually. That sounds efficient, but how does it help with security?
When you define everything as code, you get consistency. You're less likely to make mistakes that could lead to security holes. Plus, you can track changes, roll back to previous versions if you need to.
It's like having an undo button for your whole cloud infrastructure. That's pretty cool.
It is, but there are still some things to watch out for, security-wise.
Okay, like what?
Misconfiguration is a big one. If there's a mistake in your code, it could create a vulnerability, so you have to be really careful and test everything thoroughly.
Right, we don't want to accidentally leave a door wide open. What are some other things to keep in mind security-wise when we're using cloud orchestration, especially for those studying for the CCSP?
Think about secure coding practices, scanning for vulnerabilities, and keeping secrets, like API keys, safe and sound.
So it's about treating your orchestration code with the same level of care as any other critical piece of software.
Exactly. Security has to be built into the process from the ground up.
We've covered a lot of ground today, real-world examples, CCSP tips. It's been a whirlwind tour.
It has, but hopefully our listeners are starting to see how these building blocks work together and how important security is at every level.
We've built our e-commerce empire, piece by piece, making sure each part is secure. But we're not done yet. There's always more to learn.
Oh yeah, cloud security is always evolving.
Well, on that note, let's take a moment to gather our thoughts. When we come back, we'll tackle some even more advanced security stuff and leave our listeners with some final words of wisdom. Okay, Cloud Security Pros, we're back and ready for the grand finale of our deep dive into cloud building blocks.
We've built our e-commerce site. We've looked at security at every level.
Right. It's been quite a journey.
But now it's time to level up, time for those advanced concepts that really separate the cloud security masters from, well, everyone else.
Okay, I'm ready to level up. Hit me with those advanced concepts.
All right, let's start with security automation and orchestration. We touched on this a bit before.
Right, automating those deployments.
But now we're going deeper. How can we use automation to really boost our security, especially in those ever-changing cloud environments?
So it's not just about automating the setup, it's about automating the security tasks themselves.
Exactly. Think about things like automated security assessments, vulnerability scans, incident response, things that take forever if you do them manually, but with automation, they become way more efficient and you catch more stuff.
So instead of having security folks manually checking for vulnerabilities, we can have automated tools doing it 24/7. That's got to be a huge time saver.
You got it. And it's not just about speed, it's about consistency and rapid response. Automation helps us enforce security policies more consistently and react to incidents faster.
So it's like having an army of security robots working nonstop to protect our cloud environment. What kind of tools are we talking about here?
Oh, there's a whole world of them, but some of the big names are SOR platforms, CSPM tools, and IAC solutions.
Okay, I've heard those acronyms before, but I'm not sure I fully get them. Can you break them down for us?
SOR, that stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. Those platforms help us automate those security workflows like incident response and gathering threat intelligence.
Got it.
CSPM, that's Cloud Security Posture Management. Those tools are like our watchful eye, constantly checking our cloud for any misconfigurations or compliance issues. And then there's IAC, Infrastructure as Code, that lets us define our infrastructure, our servers, networks, all that as code, which is great for automating security configurations.
So we've got our automated command center, our security watchdog, and our blueprint for secure infrastructure. That's pretty powerful stuff.
It is, but like any powerful tool, you got to be careful how you use it.
Right. What are some of the things we need to watch out for, security-wise, when we're dealing with automation?
One thing is over-reliance. Thinking automation will magically solve all your problems. It won't. It's a tool, not a silver bullet.
So we still need skilled security professionals to run the show, to interpret the results, and make smart decisions.
Absolutely. You can't just set it and forget it. You got to constantly monitor those automation tools, make sure they're working as intended, and adjust as needed.
Because the bad guys, they're always coming up with new tricks.
Exactly. And our security needs to keep pace. What else? Oh, access control. That's critical. Only the right people should be able to touch those automation tools. And we need good logging and monitoring, keeping track of what's happening. And of course, we need a plan for handling errors. Things don't always go perfectly.
So it's a whole system, a framework, not just a bunch of scripts. It's got to be secure, resilient, and able to adapt.
You got it. All right, next advanced concept. Ready?
Hit me with it.
Cloud-native security tools and services. This is a hot area. Cloud providers are constantly releasing new security stuff to help us protect our data and workloads.
Okay, I'm listening. What kind of cloud-native tools might pop up on that CCSP exam?
Think cloud-native firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, web application firewalls, SIEM solutions, that kind of thing.
So these are tools that are built specifically for the cloud, not those old-school tools that were designed for on-premises setups.
Exactly. Cloud-native tools, they're often more scalable, more flexible, and they integrate better with other cloud services. Plus, they can be easier on the budget.
So it's like using the right tool for the job. If we're in the cloud, let's use cloud-native tools, but how do we know which ones to pick? There are so many options.
That's the million-dollar question. It depends. What cloud provider are you using? What kind of workloads are you running? What are your security goals?
So we're back to risk assessments and security planning, figuring out what we need, and choosing the right tools for the job.
Absolutely. And don't forget to stay up to date. New cloud-native security tools are popping up all the time.
It's a lot to keep track of. Cloud security is definitely not boring.
That's what makes it fun. It's always evolving, always challenging. And that's why it's so important to have that solid foundation and the core concepts. That's what we've been focusing on in this deep dive.
Well said. We've gone from those fundamental building blocks to advanced stuff like security automation and cloud-native tools. I feel like I've learned a ton, especially for that CCSP exam.
Awesome. But remember, learning never stops in cloud security. Keep digging deeper, keep exploring, and stay ahead of those bad guys.
That's great advice. The future of cloud security is in our hands. It's a big responsibility.
It is, but we're up for the challenge.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you feel ready to tackle that CCSP exam and make the cloud a safer place for everyone.
Stay secure out there.
And keep diving deep.